So in the last video on this subject, we looked at how theistic and religious beliefs are quite natural with normal cognitive brain functions, and how atheism is quite unnatural to form in the brain without hard cognitive work to force the belief to be there. Several studies support this. However, we received a few responses from the atheist community, as expected. However, these really made me laugh, because indirectly they actually supported my point in the first video, which I'll point out in a bit. However, I first need to point out, like many of the comments I received, these videos created a complete straw man of what I said. First, this longer video starts out by asserting the straw man right away.
People believe in a variety of different things. I get that TJ is just poking fun at the ridiculousness of some Christian beliefs, but I think it would be dishonest to assume people don't have perceivably good reasons for believing in them. So I hope we are going to see some good reasoning from inspiring philosophy in defense of those beliefs.
Yeah, now it should be clear to anyone that was not the point of my video. My response to TJ and atheists like him in this particular video was not to give a video where I defend theistic beliefs and show they are an accurate picture of reality, as I said at the end of my video.
Now to wrap up, I want to be clear, I'm not saying this demonstrates logically that God exists. I have plenty of direct arguments for that.
So the point of my video was not to defend the idea that theism is true, as I directly said in the video, and referred people to other videos where I do that. My point in this particular video was to show theists really do believe God exists. Science shows it is normal with cognitive brain functions, and atheistic beliefs require hard cognitive work that must be forced to be accepted. There is no evidence theism is the result of abnormal brain functions, meaning it would not be a delusion caused by some type of mental disorder. That should have been pretty clear, since I never once cited a study on how theism is natural and argued this shows theism is true or an accurate picture of reality. And I directly said I was not claiming this at the end. Because this video starts out with a straw man from the get-go, nothing changes. They assume I was saying something I was not and run wild with it. Like when they go over where I quoted the book Why God Won't Go Away to show religious beliefs are not unnatural.
Now I can say for sure that that statement doesn't mean what you think it means. It doesn't take much insight to see that the authors are stating that the observable neurological indicators of the so-called mystical experience fall within the parameters of normal brain function. What this means is that people who experience the mystical event really feel like they experienced it, because their brain reacted to the stimulus as though it was a real event. This, however, doesn't say anything about the reality of the stimulus which triggered the experience.
I know, guys, I didn't say this shows us what the reality of the stimuli is. Again, all you have to do is remember the belief I was responding to, and what I'm actually saying. Nowhere did I claim this shows religious beliefs are caused by God. All it shows us is they are not the result of unnatural delusions or of wishful thinking, because that is all I'm arguing in the video. The next thing they do is right after this, they forget the citation I gave, which is the book Why God Won't Go Away. In their book, they argue religious experiences may be coming from another reality, not just formed internally in the brain. So what do these guys say?
New reality citation definitely needed. You referenced 3 papers there. 2 of them were discussing brain blood flow during massages and meditation. Not a single one even mentioned a different reality. You're referencing them here makes very little sense to me, as the reference doesn't seem to fit.
Well, why don't you actually read the source instead of asking for a source, which I gave? The authors of the book cite their own studies, which I put on the screen that they use to argue for their case. Again, I am not saying this proves another reality generates them. Their point is it is not ruled out just because religious experience is happening in the brain. This was right here in the main source all along, and they didn't even bother to check.
Just because the experience follows normal brain function doesn't mean it is real. Delusions are simply beliefs that don't match reality. These can occur in perfectly normal brain functions.
Yeah, I know. Again, this response just created a straw man that I was arguing this proves theism is true or religious experiences prove they are generated by God, when I directly ended the video by saying this is not what I am arguing.
I read those papers you referenced, and they outlined evolutionary reasons as to why humans may have developed a tendency to believe in religious claims. Not a single one of those studies argued that the beliefs weren't delusions.
Once again, this is taking what I said out of context. Here is what I mean. There is a fallacy known as the equivocation fallacy, where you redefine how someone is using a term. For example, if an atheist said the Bible evolved over time, it would be wrong for me to object by saying this is false because a document is not a biological organism that changes through generations. The atheist would obviously not be claiming the Bible evolved like an organism does. In the same way, this response video is committing an equivocation fallacy. Again, what is the context of my first video, guys? We are talking about delusions that would be the result of wishful thinking, abnormal brain functions, or a mental disorder. We are asking whether religious experience is a delusion like you get from a mental disorder, which should be abnormal brain functioning. Merriam-Webster defines a delusion as either a belief that is not true, which is the broader use of the term, or a false idea or belief that is caused by a mental illness. All they have done is define delusion in the general sense of a belief not matching reality, which I directly said I am not arguing about in this video. I'm asking whether or not theism is a delusion as a result of abnormal brain functioning. Which is why I said in my video, the studies I cited show theism is not the result of an unnatural delusion. Could religious beliefs still be a delusion in a broad general sense? Of course. If theistic beliefs do not match reality, then they would be delusions in a general sense. I never denied that. My point was questioning how religious beliefs operate in the brain and showing they do not operate like delusions caused by mental disorders. This is why this response video completely missed the mark when they say stuff like this.
It is a naturalistic fallacy to assert that because it occurs naturally that you should give more credence to the idea.
Never once did I say that. Again, I'm not claiming this is evidence theism is true or it shows it is more likely true. If I said this line, they would have been quick to show it, but notice they never do. They are the ones who have to keep saying I said this, but never seem to quote me directly, where I say this shows theism is true or most likely true. They just assume I did. This is essentially all they do for most of the video.
It is perfectly natural to default to a theistic position, but that doesn't mean it's a good position or an accurate one. The fact that people are prone to theistic beliefs doesn't mean the theistic beliefs are true. Yes, the science says theistic belief is natural, but in no way does that relate to the reality of that belief.
This claim only works if you quote mine how I use the word delusion. They know how I define it because they quote me saying it and then redefine it on the spot by picking apart my use of the phrasing for their own needs. Watch.
To the ironic surprise of many atheists, who claim religion is an unnatural delusion that must be eradicated.
Strawman! Strawman, is that you? Look, I don't think most atheists, definitely not us at least, would argue that religion is unnatural, but we would argue that it is a delusion.
Yeah, we know, but again, my words were an unnatural delusion, meaning a delusion caused by abnormal brain functioning, not a general one, where you just think someone's beliefs are not true because they do not fit how you think reality operates. Yet, they accuse me of a straw man? I was specific right there in the type of delusion I meant, and they didn't even realize it. Again, and I feel like I have to say it over and over, so they actually listen this time. Nowhere am I saying the studies I went over prove theism is an accurate picture of reality. Just watch the video and you can see that. If they were confused about this, all they had to do was ask, since I was right there in the comments section, ready to clarify if there was confusion. So I'm not sure why they even responded. If they agree theism is not an unnatural delusion from the result of abnormal brain functioning, then we agree on this point. And I openly said these studies do not show theism is an accurate picture of reality and therefore more likely true. To use their own words, this response just reeks of dishonesty and laziness. So there's not much else to respond to. The rest of the video is just hammering out this straw man, and at times they quote mine what I said. Like the part where I said perhaps the disbelief of atheists is the result of hatred towards a creator. Now if you notice, I did not say this is definitely true. And I did not say a study I cited concluded this. So what did these guys say?
Okay, so again, I wasted a good portion of time reading another load of your references,
Yes, you did, because I didn't say they said that.
trying to understand where you are pulling these ideas from. And the paper you were referencing didn't state that atheists secretly believe in a god.
I know. I didn't say that. I only said, perhaps it could be the result. Again, context is important. It is funny he complained he had to spend time reading these papers, as if it is a waste of time to study scientific papers, when if he just listened to what I actually said, then he would not have wasted his time, since I did not claim what he suggested. The Messianic Manic also responded with a short 3-minute video, and it is what you would expect from him. He makes the same equivocation fallacies and uses the same flaws. The only thing of value he tries is to claim theism is a result of hyperactive agent detection. This is a neurological function where we assume there is agency, where it may not actually be. He cites Daniel Dennett, who has suggested this is where theism arose from. But the problem is this simply doesn't work for traditional theistic beliefs, and he doesn't give any scientific evidence to support its connection. Probably because several studies have debunked this attempt to connect the two. This one such study found that belief in PSI, or superstition, predicted illusionary agency detection, but traditional religion was unrelated to illusionary detection of agency in random patterns. Other studies have found no connection in even paranormal believers to hyperactive agent detection. The absence of an agency detection bias for paranormal believers when using a categorization rather than a detection task poses an important challenge for theories relating supernatural beliefs to perceptual bias toward detecting agency. According to evolutionary accounts of religion, a hyperactive agency detection device may have conferred an adaptive advantage by overestimating the presence of other agents in the environment. It has been argued that the false positives generated by HADD could be at the basis of belief in supernatural agents. So far, this evolutionary claim about the origin of supernatural beliefs lacks clear empirical support. This study also showed skeptics incorrectly identified ambiguous stimuli more than paranormal believers. In the first experiment, it was found that skeptics, compared to believers, more often incorrectly categorized ambiguous face stimuli as representing a house, indicating that disbelief, rather than belief in the paranormal, is driving the bias observed for the categorization of ambiguous stimuli. So far from showing that religious individuals have hyperactive agency detection, research actually shows that skeptics have a perceptual bias against agency. In this study, skeptics incorrectly misidentified blurred faces as inanimate objects, such as houses. So this could suggest skeptics are missing agency where it is actually present. However, Dennett and TMM's suggestion that theistic beliefs arose naturally from this is simply wrong and has no scientific basis. Which is why him merely suggesting a connection is not good enough. Possibility is not probability. People will often ask why I do not address a lot of response videos. Well, I think this video points out why. Generally, when someone like this guy responds to me, he does it by taking what I said out of context, or just making things up I never said. And all I would need to do is just restate what I already said, which would get boring after a while if I just have to keep repeating myself. There are some good atheist responses I have had time to address, and typically I do that on my blog to save time. But videos like this only prove my point, which brings me to the question, why did I even respond to this? Well, because as I said at the beginning, they kind of supported my point. What did these atheists do? Well, they took what I said out of context and invented a false reality about what my video was claiming. In other words, they invented a delusion about what I said. I didn't say this shows theism is true, and all I claimed with theism was natural and not the result of abnormal brain function. They claimed I said something else, which is not true of the reality of the situation. So they deluded themselves, which was too good to pass up, since they only show they would rather invent a delusion than face what reality is telling them.